Morning, page 141. The strangest ideas force their way into the mind of an inquisitive escaper. A sewage truck, sometimes called at the camp a tank with a suction pipe. The mouth of the pipe was wide. Tenno could easily crawl through it, stand up inside the tank with its head bent, and then the driver could take the liquid sewage as long as he didn't fill it up to the top. You would be covered with filth. You might choke, drown, suffocate on the way, but this seemed less revolting to Tenno than slavishly serving out his sentence. He examined himself. Was he game? He was. What about the driver, though? He was a minor offender, serving a short sentence, and with an exit permit. Tenno had a smoke with him and looked him over. No, he was not the right man. He wouldn't risk his past to help someone else. He had the mentality of a corrective labor camp. Only fools help other people. In the course of that winter, Tenno devised a plan and also picked himself 4 comrades. But one day, while the plan was still being patiently worked out, as the theory requires, he was unexpectedly marched out to a new opened work site, a stone quarry. It was a hilly spot and invisible from the camp. As yet, there were no watchtowers and no security fence, just stakes knocked into the ground with a few strands of wire. At one point, there was a gap in the wire, which served as a gate. 6 guards stood outside. Six guards stood outside the wire with nothing to raise them above ground level. Beyond them was the April steppe, its grass still fresh and green. Sorry. And a blaze of tulips as far as the eye could see. Those tulips, that April air, were more than the heart of an escaper could bear. Perhaps this was his chance. While you're not suspected, while you're still not suspected, not yet in the disciplinary barracks, now's the time to run. During his time there, Tenno had gotten to know a lot of people in the camp and he now quickly assembled a team of 4. Misha Kadyrov, he had been with the Marines in North Korea, had crossed the 38th parallel to avoid a court-martial, not wishing to spoil his good relations firmly established in Korea. The American had handed him back, and he had got a quarter. Jazdik, a Polish driver from the Anders army. He vividly summarized his life story with the help of his unmatching boots. One from Hitler, one from Stalin. And lastly, Sergei, a railwayman from Kubashev. Then a lorry arrived with real posts and rolls of barbed wire for a boundary fence, just as the dinner break was beginning. Tenno's team, loving forced labor as they did, especially when it was to make their prison more secure, volunteered to unload a lorry in the rest period They scrambled onto the back, but since it was, after all, dinner time, they took their time while they thought things over. The driver had moved away from his vehicle. The prisoners were lying all over the place, basking in the sun. Should they run for it or not? They had nothing ready, no knife, no equipment, no food, no plan, but Tenno knew from his little map that if they were driving, they must make a dash for Jezdi and then to Ulatau. The lads were eager to try it. This was their chance, their lucky chance. From where they were to the sentry at the gate, the way was downhill. Just beyond the gate, the road rounded a hill. If they drove out fast, they'd soon be safe from marksmen, and the sentries could not leave their posts. They finished unloading before the break was over. Jazdik was to drive. He jumped off and puttered about the lorry, while the other three lazily lay down in the rear, out of sight, hoping that some of the sentries hadn't seen where they had got to. Jazdik brought the driver over. "We haven't kept you waiting, so let's have a smoke." They'd lit up. "Right, wind her up." The driver got into the cab, but the engine obstinately refused to start. The three in the back of the lorry didn't know Jazdik's plan and thought their attempt had misfired. Jazdik began turning the crank. Still the engine would not start. Jazdik was tired, and he suggested to the driver that they change places. Now Jazdik was in the cab, and the engine immediately let out a roar. The lorry rolled down the slope toward the sentry at the gate. Jazdik told him later that he had tampered with the throttle while the driver was at the wheel, and quickly turned it on again before he himself took over. The driver was in no hurry to jump in. He thought that Jazdik would stop the lorry. Instead, it passed through the gate at speed. 2 shouts of halt. The lorry went on. The sentries opened fire, shooting into the air at first because it looked very much like a mistake. Perhaps some shots were aimed at the lorry. The runaways couldn't tell. They were lying flat. Around a bend, once behind the hill, they were safe from bullets. The three in the back kept their heads down. It was bumpy. They were traveling fast. Then suddenly it came to a stop, and Jazdik cried out in despair. He had taken a wrong turn, and they were pulled up short by the gates of a mine, with its own camp area and its own watchtowers. More shooting. Guards ran towards them. The escapers tumbled out onto the ground facing downward and covered their heads with their hands. Convoy guards kick, aiming particularly at the head, the ears, the temples, and from above the spine. The wholesome universal rule, "Don't kick a man when he's down," did not apply in Stalin's Katorga. If a man was down, that's just what they did, kicked him, and if he was on his feet, they shot him. But the inquiry revealed that there had been no breakout. Yes, the lads said in unison that they'd been dozing in the back when the lorry started to move. Then there was shooting at it. It was too late for them to jump off in case they were shot. And Jazdik, he was inexperienced, couldn't handle the lorry, but he'd steered for the next mine door, not for the step. So they got off with a beating. Preparations for planned escape take their own course. To make a compass, take a plastic container and mark the points on it. Break a bit off a spoke, magnetize it, and mount it on a wooden float. Then pour in water, and that's your compass. Drinking water can conveniently be poured into an inner tube, which the escaper will carry like a greatcoat roll. All these things, together with food and clothing, are carried gradually to the woodworking plant from which the escape is to be made, and hidden in a hole near the bandsaw, a free driver sells them an inner tube filled with water. This too now lies in the hole. Sometimes trains arrive by night, and the loaders are left at the worksite to deal with them. That's when they must run for it. One of the 3 employees, in return for a sheet brought out from the camp area, best prices paid, had already cut the 2 lower strands of wire near the bandsaw, and the night for unloading timber is getting closer and closer, but one prisoner, a Kazakh, tracks them to the hole they use as a hiding place and denounces them. Arrest, beatings, interrogations. In Tenno's case, they were too many coincidences, which looked like preparations to escape. They were sent off to the Kangaroo jail, and Tenno was standing face to the wall, hands behind his back, when a captain in charge of the culture and education section went by, stopped near him, and exclaimed, "Who'd have thought of it of you? You are a member of the concert party." What most amazed him was that a peddler of prison camp culture should want to escape. On concert days he was allowed an extra portion of mush, and yet he had tried to run away. Some people are never satisfied. On May 9, 1950, the 5th anniversary of victory in the Fatherland War, naval veteran Georgy Tenno entered a cell in the celebrated Kangaroo prison. The cell was almost dark, with only one little window high up, and there was no air, but there was plenty of bugs. The walls were covered with splotches of bug blood. That summer a heat wave was raging, with temperatures between 40 and 50 degrees centigrade, and everyone lay around naked. It was a little cooler under the sleeping platform, but one night 2 prisoners shot out from there with a yell. Poisonous spiders had perched on them. It was a select company in the Kangaroo jail, brought together from various camps. In every cell, there were experienced escapers, hand-picked champions. Tenno had found his committed escapers at last. Among the prisoners was Captain Ivan Vorobyov, hero of the Soviet Union. During the war, he had been with the partisans in the Tykov Oblast. He was a resolute man of indomitable courage. He had already made unsuccessful attempts to escape and would make others. Unfortunately, he could not take on the jailbird coloring, the half-caste look, which is so helpful to a runaway. He had preserved his soldier's straightforwardness. He had a chief of staff, and they sat on the bed platform drawing a map of the locality and openly discussing plans. He could not adjust to the sly, furtive ways of the camp, and was invariably betrayed by stool pigeons. A plan fermented in their heads to overpower the warder supervising the issue of the evening meal if he came alone, then open all the cells with the key, rush to the jailhouse exit and take control of it, then open the jailhouse door and mob the camp guard room, take the guards along as prisoners and break out of the camp area as soon as darkness fell. Later they would be taken out to work on a housing site and plan for escaping through the sewage system, and a plan for escaping through the sewage system was born. But these plans were never implemented. Before the summer was out, this whole select company was manacled and transported for some reason to Spassk. There, they were put into a hut with a separate security system. On the 4th night, the committed escapers removed the bars from the window, got out into the service yard, noiselessly killed a dog, and tried to cross a roof to the huge main camp area, but the iron roof bent under their feet, and the noise in the quiet of night was like thunder. The warders gave the alarm, but when they arrived inside the hut, everyone was peacefully sleeping, and the bars were back in place. The warders had simply imagined it all. They were destined never, never to remain long in one place. The committed escapers, like Flying Dutchmen, were driven ever onward by their troubled destiny. If they didn't run away, they were transferred. The whole band of men in a hurry was switched in handcuffs to Ekabatsu's camp jail. There, the camp's own successful runaways, Brukin and Mutinov, were added to their strength. As part of their special punitive regime, they were taken out to work in the lime kilns. They unloaded quicklime for lorries. With the wind blowing and the lime was slaked in their eyes, mouths, and windpipes. When they raked out the furnaces, their sweaty, naked bodies were coated with slaked lime. This daily poisoning, intended to reform them, only forced them to hurry up with their escape. The plan dictated itself. The lime was brought by lorry. They must make their break in a lorry, break through the boundary fence, which still consisted of barbed wire in this place, take a lorry with plenty of petrol in the tank. The ace driver among the escapers was Kolya Zhdanov, Tenno's partner in the unsuccessful breakout from the sawmill. It was agreed that he would drive the lorry, but agreement or no agreement, Vorobyov was too strong-willed, too much the man of action to put himself in anyone else's hands. So when they pinched the lorry, armed with knives, they climbed into the cab, one on each side, and a white-faced driver could only sit there between them. An involuntary accomplice, it was Vorobyov who took over the steering wheel. Every minute counted. They must all jump onto the lorry and break through the barrier. Ivan, move over, Tenno begged him, but that was something Ivan Vorobyov could not do. Having no faith in his skill as a driver, Tenno and Zhdanov stayed behind. There were now only 3 escapers, Vorobyov, Solopayev, and Martyrsov. Suddenly, from nowhere, Redkin ran up, an intellectual, a mathematician, an eccentric, with no record at all as an escaper. He was in the disciplinary barracks for something quite different, but on this occasion he had been standing near, realized what was happening, and hopped onto the lorry, holding, for some reason, a lump of bread, but not soap. Freedom bound, I'm coming with you, like somebody boarding a bus. Is this right for Razgilai? The lorry swung round and moved forward at low speed, so as to break through the strands gradually, the first of them with its bumpers, then it would be the turn of the engine, and then of the cab. In the outer security zone, the lorry could pass between the posts, but the main boundary area had to knock posts down because they were staggered. In first gear, the lorry started pushing a post over. The guards on the towers were taken aback. There had been an incident at another site a few days earlier when a drunken driver had smashed a post in the maximum security zone. Perhaps this was another drunk. The thought was with them for 15 seconds, but by then the post was down, and the lorry had changed into second gear and driven over the barbed wire without a puncture. Shoot now, but there was nothing to shoot at. To protect the guards from the winds of Kazakhstan, their towers had been boarded up on 3 sides. They could only shoot into the enclosed area ahead of them. By now the lorry was invisible to them, speeding over the steppe and raising dust. The watchtowers fired impotently into the air. The roads were all free, the steppe was smooth, and in 5 minutes Vorobyov's lorry could have been on the horizon, but purely by chance a prisoner transport van belonging to the Camp Guards Division drove up on its way to the transport base for repairs. It quickly took some of the sentries aboard and gave chase to Vorobyov. The breakout was over within 20 minutes. The battered runaways, the Redkin, the mathematician among them, his bloodied mouth full to the warm, salty taste of freedom, staggered their way to the camp jail. All the same, when word went around the camp, the break had been a beautiful job, and they had been stopped only by accident. So 10 days later, the former air cadet Batinov and his two friends repeated this maneuver. They broke through the barbed wire barriers at another work site and raced off. Only in their haste they had taken the wrong road and came under fire from a watchtower at the lime kilns. A tire was punctured and the lorry came to a stop. Tommy Gunner surrounded it. "Oh, you come." Should they get out, or should they wait to be dragged out by the scruff of their neck? One of the three, Pasachnik, obeyed the order, got out of the lorry, and was immediately riddled with a furious burst of bullets. In something like a month, there had been 3 attempts to escape Ekibatsus, and still Tenno was not on the run. He was pining away. A jealous longing to outdo them gnawed at him from the sidelines. You see all the mistakes more clearly, and you always think that you could do better. If, for instance, Zhdanok had been at the wheel instead of Vorobyev, then they could, or so Tenno thought, have got away from the prison van. The minute Vorobyev's lorry would stop, Tenno and Zhdanok sat down to discuss how they would make their own break. Zhdanok was small, swarthy, very agile, and a half-caste. He was now 26. He had been taken from his native Belarusia to Germany and worked for the Germans as a driver. He too was serving a quarter. When he caught fire, he was very energetic. He put everything he had into his work, into an impulse, a fight, an escape. Of course, he lacked discipline, but Tenno had plenty of that. Everything pointed to the lime kilns as the best place for their escape. If they couldn't make their break in a lorry, they must seize one outside the restricted area. But before the guards or the security officer could interfere with the plans, Tenno was called aside by the foreman of the punitive work gang, Lyoshka, the gypsy, Lyoshka Navruzov, a bitch and a puny creature who nonetheless struck terror in everybody. Because of his time in the camps, he had murdered dozens of people. He thought nothing of killing a man for a parcel or even a pack of cigarettes. I am an escaper myself, and I love escapes. Look at all them bullet scars. That's from when I ran away in the taiga. I know you meant to run away with Vorobyev. Just don't do it from the work site. I'm responsible there, and I'll get another stretch. In other words, he loved escapers, but loved himself more. Yoshka and Gypsy were content with a bitch's life and wouldn't let anyone ruin it. That's how much your professional criminal loves freedom. But perhaps escape attempts at Ekibatsus really were becoming hackneyed. Everyone tried to escape from the work site, nobody from the living area. Dare he risk it? The living area also was at present surrounded only by wire. There was no solid fence. One day, at the lime kilns, they damaged the electric cable of a cement mixer. An electrician was called in from the outside, while Tenno helped him with the repairs. Zhdanok stole some wire cutters from his pocket. The electrician missed them. Should he inform the guards? He couldn't. He would be punished himself for his carelessness. He begged the professional criminals to give him back his cutters, but they denied taking them. While they were at the lime kilns, the would-be escapers made themselves 2 knives. They chiseled strips of metal from shovels, sharpened them at the blacksmith's shop, tempered them, and cast tin handles for them in clay molds. Tenno's was a Turkish knife. It would be a handy weapon to use, and what was more important, the flashy curve of its blade was terrifying. Their intention was to frighten people, not kill them. Wire cutters and knives they carried to the living area, held to their ankles by the legs of their underpants, and stowed them away in the foundations of the hut. Once again, their escape plan hinged on the culture and education section. While the weapons were being made and transferred, Tenno chose a suitable moment to announce that he and Zhadanak would like to take part in a camp concert. This would be the first ever at Ekibatsu, and the camp command could not wait to get it rolling. They needed an extra item in their list of measures to take prisoners' minds off the plotting, and besides, it would be fun to see them posturing on a stage after 11 hours of hard labor. Sure enough, Tenno and Zhadanak were given permission to leave the punishment wing after it was locked for the night, and while the camp area as a whole was still alive and in motion for another 2 hours. They roamed the still unknown camp, noting how, when the guard was changed on the watchtowers, and which were the most convenient spots to crawl under the boundary fence. In the culture and education section itself, Tenno carefully read the Pavlodar provincial newspaper, trying to memorize the names of the districts, state farms, collective farms, farm chairmen, party secretaries, shop workers of all kinds. Next, he announced that he would put on a sketch, for which he must get a hold of his ordinary clothes for the clothing store and borrow a briefcase, or run away with a briefcase. That was something out of the ordinary. It would help him look important. Permission was given. Tenno was still wearing his naval jacket, and now he took out his Icelandic gear, a souvenir of a northern convoy. Zhadanak took from his pal's suitcase a gray Belgian suit, which looked incongruously elegant in camp surroundings. A Latvian prisoner had a briefcase among his belongings. This too was taken. Also real caps instead of the camp issue. The sketch required so much rehearsing that the time left till lights out in the main camp area was too short, so there was one night, and later on another, when Tenno and Zhadanak did not return to the punishment wing at all, but spent the night in the hut which housed the culture and education section. To accustom their own warders to their absence, escapers must have at least one night's head start. A moment. What would be the most propitious moment for escape? Evening roll call. When the lines formed outside the huts, the warders were all busy checking the prisoners, while the prisoners had eyes only for the doors, longing to get to their beds. No one was watching the rest of the camp area. The days were getting shorter, and they must hit on when roll call would come after sundown in the twilight, but before the dogs were stationed around the boundary fence. They must not let slip those 5 or 10 uniquely precious minutes, because there would be no crawling out once the dogs were there. They chose Sunday, September 17th. It would help that Sunday was a non-working day, that they could recruit their strength by evening and take time over the final preparations. The last night before escape, you can't expect much sleep. You think and think, shall I be alive this time tomorrow? Possibly not. And if I stay here in the camp, To die the lingering death of a goner by a cesspit. No, you mustn't even begin to accept the idea that you're a prisoner. The question is, are you prepared to die? You are? Then you are also prepared to escape. A sunny Sunday, to rehearse their sketch, both of them were led outside the punishment wing for the whole day. To Tenno's surprise, there was a letter from his mother in the CES, Cultural and Education section. On that day of all days, prisoners can call to mind so many coincidences of this kind. It was a sad letter, but perhaps it helped to steel his resolve. His wife was still in prison. She had not yet gone on to camp. And his sister-in-law was demanding that his brother should break off relations with the traitor. The runaways were very short of food. In the punishment wing, they were on short rations, and hoarding bread would excite suspicion. They banked on seizing a lorry in the settlement and traveling quickly. However, that Sunday there was also a parcel from home. His mother's blessing on his escape. Glucose tablets, macaroni, oatmeal. These they could carry in a briefcase. The cigarettes they would exchange for Majorca, except for one packet they would give to the orderly in the sick bay. And Zhdanov would be on the list of those excused from duty for that day. The purpose of this was as follows. Tenno could go to the CES and say, My Zhdanov is sick. We shan't be coming to rehearse this evening. While in the punishment barracks, he would tell the warder and Lyoshka the gypsy, We shan't come back to the hut this evening. We're rehearsing. So no one could be expecting them in either place. They must get a hold of a Katyusha, an improvised glider consisting of a wick in a tube and a steel and a flint to light it. This was better than matches for a man on the run. Then they must pay their last visit to Hafiz in his hut. The old Tatar, an experienced escaper, was to have made the break with them, but then he decided he was too old, and would only be a hindrance to their flight. Now he was the only man in camp who knew about their plans. He was sitting on his stool with his legs tucked under him. He spoke in a whisper. God give you good fortune. I shall pray for you. He whispered a few more words in Tatar, running his hands over his face. Also, in Ekipat suits, was Tenno's old cellmate in the Lubyanka, Ivan Kovarchenko. He did not know about the escape plan, but he was a good comrade. He was a trustee and lived in a cabin of his own. It was there that the runaways kept all the things for the sketch. It was the obvious place for them to boil the oatmeal, which had arrived in a meager parcel from Tenno's mother. Some strong black tea was brewed at the same time. They were enjoying their miniature banquet. The guests, overcome by the thought of what was before them, their host by the pleasure of a fine Sunday, when suddenly they saw through the window a coffin of rough boards being carried across the camp from the guardhouse to the morgue. It was for Pasechnik, who had been shot a few days before. Yes, sighed Kovarchenko. It's useless trying to escape, if he only knew. Some devil prompted Kovarchenko to rise, pick up their bulging briefcase, stride self-importantly about the cabin, and sternly declare, The investigating officer knows all about it. You are planning to escape. He was joking. He had taken it into his head to play the part of an interrogator. Some joke, or perhaps it was a delicate hint. I can guess what you're up to, but I advise against it. When Kovarchenko went out, the runaways put on their suits under their clothes they were wearing and unpicked all their number patches. leaving them attached by the merest of threads so that they would tear off with one pull. The caps without numbers went into the briefcase. Sunday was coming to an end. A golden sun was setting. Tenno, tall and leisurely, and Shadanak, small and vivacious, now draped padded jackets around their shoulders, took the briefcase. By now everyone in the camp was used to their eccentric appearance, and went to the prearranged departure point, on the grass between some huts, not far from the boundary fence and directly opposite a watchtower. The huts screened them from two other watchtowers. There was only one sentry facing them. They opened out their padded jackets, lay down on them, and played chess so that the sentry would get used to them. The sky turned gray. There was a signal for a roll call. The prisoners flocked to their huts. In the half-light, the sentry on the watchtower could not be able to make out that two men were still lying on the grass. Should not be able to make out. His watch was nearly over, and he was less alert than he had been. A stale sentry always makes escape easier. They intended to cut the wire, not in the open, but directly under the tower. The sentry certainly spent more time watching the boundary fence farther away than the ground under his feet. Their heads were down near the grass, and besides, it was dusk, so they could not see the spot at which they would shortly crawl under. But it had been thoroughly inspected in advance. Immediately beyond the boundary fence, a hole had been dug for a post, and it would be possible to hide there a minute. A little farther on, there were mounds of slag, and a road running from the guards' hamlet to the settlement. The plan was to take a lorry as soon as they reached the settlement, stop one and say to the driver, "Do you want to earn something? We have to bring 2 cases of vodka up here from old Ikebatsu's." What driver would refuse a drink? They would bargain with him. "Half a liter, all right? A liter? Right, step on it, but not a word to anybody." Then on the highway, sitting with the driver in his cab, they would overpower him, drive him out into the steppe and leave him there tied up, while they tore off to reach the Irtish in a single night, abandon the lorry, cross the river in a little boat, and move onward to Omsk. It got a little darker still. Up in the tower, searchlights were switched on. Their beams lit up in the boundary fence, but the runaways, for the time being, were in a shadowy patch. The very time. Soon the watch would be changed and the dogs would be brought along and posted for the night. Now the lights were switched on in the huts, and they could see the prisoners going in after roll call. Was it nice inside? It would be warm and comfortable, whereas you could be riddled with Tommy gun bullets, and it would be all the more humiliating because you were lying stretched on the ground. Just so long as they didn't cough or sneeze under the tower. Guard away, you guard dogs. Your job is to keep us here. Ours is to run away. But now let Tenno himself take up the story. Oh, that's the end of the chapter. The White Kitten, Georgie Tenno's Tale, next time. Ooh, that was really exciting. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.